This is North Korea, the most isolated country on Earth. It's a totalitarian state, run by a dictatorial monarchy. But there is something else that sets this autocratic society apart from its predecessors. There is simply no escape. You might be thinking that this is a common theme in a totalitarian society. Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, Franco or Mussolini's fascist regimes in Spain and Italy. Aren't defectors, heretics, and dissenting voices imprisoned, exiled, or murdered in all these scenarios? Well, although this was the case throughout these different historical regimes, in each of those European examples of totalitarianism, escape was still possible. Allied forces helped sneak prisoners of war and useful informants out of these countries through back channels, and double agents working within these states would often facilitate escape plans for important personnel. In today's North Korea, nobody comes in and nobody comes out. The reality of Allied personnel working in the shadows to help defectors escape is far more restricted in this modern context. Similar to their dictatorial predecessors like Stalin and Mao, the Kim dynasty running through North Korea have insulated their society, economy, and culture to the extent that even their perfectly innocent citizens are trapped. And like with any totalitarian state, loyalty to the supreme leader is a prerequisite for North Korean citizens. Collective opposition to the government is almost entirely absent. They understand that they are forever under the watchful eye of this supreme leader, desiring freedom but knowing it's unobtainable. Sadly, when the hundreds of doomed defectors that attempt their escape every year fail, people on the inside and outside are rarely surprised. But why? Why is it understood that these poor souls will almost always fail? Why can you never escape from North Korea? The first thing to understand about why escaping North Korea is so difficult is the risk-reward factor. By that, I mean, is the reward of escape worth the risk of escape? A severe enough punishment will deter the vast majority of people from pursuing any desire, regardless of how much they crave it. And the risk-reward factor for North Koreans isn't hard to understand. If the punishments were not too severe, we would see droves of defectors every day fleeing a society riddled with food shortages, famine, and draconian forms of persecution and oppression. Unfortunately, the punishments are life-threateningly severe. Along the border areas with China and South Korea, there is a shoot-on-sight order that exists, allowing soldiers to kill any North Korean they see with impunity. If you are caught by North Korean soldiers while fleeing and somehow aren't shot, you are arrested and sent to a prison camp where you will be subjected to forced labor, malnutrition, and various forms of mental and physical abuse. The alternative is that you are executed, and the bonus is that all your family may be subjected to the same fate as well to make a point out of you. If you were to escape to China and are caught, the Chinese government will deport you back to North Korea, where you will again be either executed or sent to a prison camp. Execution is not reserved for defectors only. Execution is a common punishment for various crimes, like murder or drug trafficking, but also for far less severe crimes, like political dissidence or consuming media that is not state-approved. If your life is spared, however, and you end up in a labor camp, the odds of survival are low. Although families are punished according to the 3-generation rule, where the family of a person who has committed a crime will have to endure the labor camp for up to 3 generations, most sentences rarely last that long, and not because of leniency. Due to a lack of food, clothing, and resources, around 40% of prisoners perish within a few years from malnutrition, never coming near the lifetime sentence. This constant fear of exile, torture, or death for offenses that people in democracies may consider minor or even benign is the most powerful deterrent for those wishing to escape this rogue state. It means that those only willing to risk their lives even attempt to flee, which narrows the number of escapes tremendously. So, if you were one of these brave souls that's willing to risk it all for your freedom, you have to create an escape plan, and that escape plan will be based on several factors, the first of which is geography. If you wish to escape, you have to plan around 2 questions: where and how. Both can only be answered by understanding North Korea's geography and determining which route offers the best odds of success. Now, as a country in East Asia, occupying the northern portion of the Korean peninsula, North Korea is already located in a region that does not help defectors. To the north, it's bordered by Russia and China, both countries with totalitarian and communist pasts that have historically collaborated on suppressing dissent and helping each other maintain control of their citizens, particularly the unruly ones that try to escape. To the east is the East Sea, and to the west is the Yellow Sea, both bodies of water that confine North Koreans to 2 realistic escape options: north or south. The Yellow Sea is especially dangerous due to frequent typhoons and violent waters. Meanwhile, the East Sea is simply too big to cross without a proper boat. To the south is the Republic of South Korea, Pyongyang's mortal enemy, exemplifying the alternate path Korea could have taken before the civil war splintered the Korean peninsula. For most, this option to the south is a non-starter. It's the most difficult route to escape through due to the DMZ. The DMZ is the demilitarized zone at the Korean border, 160 miles long and 2.5 miles wide, heavily packed with military personnel, guards, and surveillance equipment, making it one of the most guarded areas on Earth, through which very few people have ever survived an escape attempt. As far as the terrain and topography goes, North Korea does not offer an easily traversable landscape either. The Nangnim Mountains run along the center of the country from north to south, separating the east and west sides of the peninsula. This is an obstacle for those trying to avoid main roads, where detection is likelier, and it's the only one of many geographical barriers preventing escape. The mountainous terrain of North Korea only becomes more difficult the more you analyze it. The Hamgyong Mountains, which extend northeast from the Nangnim Mountains into the Kaima Highlands, create another enormous obstacle to cross for defectors going north. These mountains form a steep slope between the Kaima Highlands in the country's northeast and the East Sea. On top of this, yet another mountain range in the southeast, known as the Taebaek Mountain Range, which extends into South Korea, means that an escape to the south must go through the center or southwest if you wish to avoid dangerous mountain terrain. So realistically, if you want to escape to China or South Korea, it is best to live on the west coast, where the landscape is flatter and easier to traverse. However, this also means that more surveillance will be present. These geographic barriers have been reinforced by man-made barriers as well in recent years. If you take a look at this graph marking the amount of North Korean defectors each year from 1998 to 2023, you'll notice that there has been a massive decrease in the number of people trying to escape. There are a few reasons for this. First, during the pandemic, North Korea built new barriers along their Chinese and Russian borders, with an outer and an inner wall, leaving a buffer zone in the middle, where defectors are essentially trapped and more visible to guards. And yes, these guards operate under a shoot-on-sight order. This has rendered the northern route of escape more dangerous than ever. Even worse than this is the fact that since 2022, as a response to the pandemic, domestic travel has become more restricted than ever. North Korean citizens can now only travel outside their cities or counties with a business trip certificate authorized by the government. In recent years, the government has also implemented AI facial recognition technologies in cities and border town locations. This technology, adopted from the CCP in China, can instantaneously detect defectors wherever they appear in public and notify authorities. The pandemic presented the Kim regime with an opportunity to limit movement of citizens and fortify security measures like never before. The country has now reached an insurmountable level of techno-surveillance, putting even dystopian concepts of totalitarian control to shame. Part of North Korea's isolation is the extreme censorship and complete media control by the government. Now, while none of us may be living in a country remotely comparable to their press censorship, we are all living in a time where it's getting harder and harder to get news without a hidden agenda behind it, which makes it very easy to spread disinformation. That's why I'm happy to announce the sponsor of this video, Ground News. Their website and app gathers related articles from around the world in one place, so you can see a breakdown of the coverage with full transparency. Let me show you how it works. So, 2 months ago, news came out about a meeting going to happen between national security advisors of the US, South Korea, and Japan to discuss North Korea. And so, when we go to Ground News' page on this, through their coverage details, we can see the amount of outlets reporting the story and where they fall on the political spectrum. In this case, over 20 articles have been published and 33% of them are from the center, which is actually pretty good. If you're concerned about how they came to that conclusion, Ground News actually has all the news companies rated politically down below. These ratings come from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. You can just click on any headline to be taken to the publication's original article. You can also see the factuality of the sources too. So here, 60% is coming from highly factual outlets like the AP. And you can even see the ownership of where these stories are coming from too, like whether it's from a corporation or an independent publisher. Then you can compare the headlines to see how the left, right, and center are covering it differently. And if you'd want a summary of these differences, you can just scroll up and go through the bias insights. Go to ground.news/versed to see through misleading media narratives and think critically about the news you read. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 30% off the Vantage plan, which is the plan I have and gives me full access to all the features I mentioned. Thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Now, if anyone is fortunate enough to evade these obstacles and escape across the border, the dangers only begin to mount. If you somehow cross the Chinese border in the north, for example, you are by no means in the clear. It is an unfathomably long and arduous journey through China to Mongolia, or through China down into Southeast Asia. Countries like Mongolia, Laos, or Cambodia deport defectors back to South Korea instead of North Korea out of sympathy, Getting there is often a true escape. However, the journey to these friendly nations through China is typically much too far and much too dangerous to be successful, even once you've crossed the border. The surveillance state capabilities in China are even more advanced than in North Korea, so defectors are equally vulnerable to capture throughout this part of the journey. As nearly every Chinese citizen's facial data is stored on a government database, North Koreans turn up nothing when scanned, making them clearly identifiable. Some recent accounts of failed defectors include those who have been caught by this technology at train stations, where they were seized as soon as they sat down on the train. And as we mentioned earlier, China is North Korea's closest ally and longtime collaborator on repatriation of defectors, routinely deporting any escapees once caught. In fact, just in December 2023, it was reported that 600 North Korean defectors that were repatriated after fleeing to China have vanished. South Korean human rights groups have said that it was the largest mass repatriation of its kind in years. China likely avoids blatant violations of international law with these deportations by classifying those fleeing as economic migrants who are in the country illegally, instead of as refugees or defectors, which they are. With China's help, these are the lengths North Korea has gone to so as to maintain subservience amongst its people, making it more impossible to escape than ever. China is still the primary escape route, and it's easier than Russia for a few reasons. One is that northeastern China has the largest population of ethnic Koreans in the world outside of Korea, allowing defectors to blend in throughout border towns by passing themselves off as Korean-speaking Chinese. For this reason, underground tunnel networks facilitating the movement of North Koreans along this border are denser and more well-developed. Next, due to normalized relations between the two countries, the Chinese border has historically been less guarded than the Russian border or the DMZ. On top of that, the climate along this border is similar to the North Korean climate, whereas a long trek during the harsh Siberian winters of the northeast poses a greater challenge for those trying to escape. You also have the fact that the Sino-Korean border is the largest border North Korea has. Over 840 miles of borderland separates the two countries, providing ample opportunity for escape points. However, it still remains futile due to China's response if they are caught. Only 20 military personnel have defected through this border since 1966, which isn't exactly a ringing endorsement of the route as safe or even effective, even if it is the most viable option. The Russia-Korea border is a meager 10.7 miles in comparison. Some of you may think that Russia could perhaps be more lenient with North Korean defectors than China is, but unfortunately this isn't the case. In fact, human rights groups such as the Civic Assistance Human Rights Group of Russia tracks these cases and reported that in 2017, only 2 North Koreans out of 211 applicants were granted refugee status in Russia. These figures are likely to continue after the 2014 deportation agreement, signed by Russia and North Korea, which formalized an understanding between the two countries to repatriate citizens living illegally within each other's borders. This leaves South Korea and the DMZ as the only escape route that, if successful, would not lead to repatriation once there. In other words, the only immediate border crossing route North Koreans can take where there is no risk of being deported to a prison camp on the other side runs through the most securely monitored borderland in the world, which is virtually impenetrable. But even though it seems undoable, it isn't quite impossible. Some people have succeeded in escaping North Korea, and if you want to know how it can be done, then their stories merit a closer look. Let's begin with the most recent case of a miraculous escape, during the post-pandemic landscape nonetheless, where the country's internal security has reached an all-time high. Due to the now ever-present facial recognition technology, which helps spot defectors on buses and trains, only cars or vans provided by escape brokers are safe for traveling to border crossing points. With established escape routes being blocked off during the pandemic, one man, Mr. Kim, along with his brother, escaped by sea, perhaps the most treacherous escape route imaginable. After starvation and government repression worsened in 2022, Mr. Kim and his brother planned an escape meticulously for 7 months. One stormy night when the seas were rough, the men began their journey. Their children were asleep, knocked out by sleeping pills and hidden in burlap sacks disguised as tool bags to protect them from the traumatic events ahead. They lived in a small fishing village in the country's far southwest, which gave them an alternative yet riskier way out compared to the well-established yet now blocked escape routes. And since the DMZ Maritime Guards would be less prevalent in the waters during the storm, they felt it was the best option. Mr. Kim had spent months enrolled in a fishing scheme at a nearby military base. Fishermen would catch fish that would then be sold for military equipment. During this period, he cozied up to the guards and soldiers, extracting key information from them, everything from their movement patterns to shift times. This is how he knew to leave at 10 p.m. that stormy night. Mr. Kim and his brother had also surveyed the minefield along the coast during this period. mapping it out while pretending to pick medicinal herbs. The mines were planted that year to prevent people from escaping. When the weather turned rough one evening, the brothers knew that the night they had been waiting for had arrived. They traversed the minefield with their children, Mr. Kim's wife, and his elderly mother by their side. Once they reached the fishing boat, they gradually began drifting as far as they could without being detected, moving at a slow pace, hoping to appear as floating debris from afar. Once he was nearing the edge of the maritime border, Mr. Kim burst full speed ahead until out of the DMZ maritime zone and into South Korean territory, specifically Yeonpyeong Island. Looking back, he saw a North Korean boat in hot pursuit. But fortunately, the guards only discovered them when it was too late, and the Kim family was free. This is a rare example of an escape by sea, and the months of intelligence collection and planning highlight the degree of difficulty behind this particular escape route, especially given the fact that they were still almost caught. If you had access to a boat like Mr. Kim, perhaps it is worth a try, but there is a reason that the maritime escape is the road less traveled for North Korean defectors. It requires a perfect storm to work. If escape by boat isn't an option, as is the case for most North Koreans, traveling through the underground network of brokers and tunnels at one of the borders is your next best bet. The problem is that due to increased surveillance technology, escape has not only become more difficult, but also more costly. Not that long ago, desperate North Koreans who wanted to defect would pay around $1,500 to escape groups. During the pandemic, this rose to $6,000, and now in some cases, it can be as high as $20,000 if the desired destination is South Korea. That's a 10-fold increase from pre-pandemic prices. This is simply unaffordable for the vast majority of the population, dramatically reducing the frequency of escape attempts. It could take decades to acquire this kind of cash for most North Koreans, which underlines how essential it is to have friends and family funding your getaway from the outside. Despite the modern surveillance technology and increased border security in North Korea, the inflation of broker fees might be the biggest obstacle to escaping the country. Without outside help from family members who have escaped and no funds to hire an escape broker, most North Koreans must plan and attempt their escapes all by themselves, like Mr. Kim. This is another explanation for the massive decline in defectors over the last decade or so under Kim Jong-un. If you were to acquire the funds for a broker and planned on escaping through conventional routes along the Chinese border, then you'd need to contact and hire a broker you can trust. This is not easy. The database for North Korean human rights and the Transitional Justice Working Group estimate that up to 80% of female refugees fleeing North Korea wind up in the hands of human traffickers who sell them into the industry, or to wealthy Chinese men as wives. Meanwhile, the male refugees are often sold as slaves and forced into hard labor in various parts of East Asia, just as if they had been sent to a North Korean prison camp. This means that many North Koreans that give a broker their life savings in exchange for their assistance with their escape simply end up being trafficked, something many still find as a risk worth taking. On the flip side, many honest brokers trust refugees who are in fact North Korean agents sent to infiltrate rescue operations, leading to their own demise. This uncertainty amongst both sides of the broker paradigm has made the process truly volatile. Unfortunately for most, it is simply the only option, regardless of how risky it is. Now, if you are lucky enough to hire a broker you trust, most likely you will attempt to cross the eastern part of the Chinese border, across the Tumen River. This is the most popular route for defectors heading north. With the new buffer zone, it has become more difficult, but it can be swum across in warmer seasons or walked across in winter once it freezes over. Now that China has been cracking down on defectors, lingering around a border town where brokers covertly provide you with a job and accommodation is perhaps too risky. The journey through China to safer pastures should be started immediately. Typically, the multi-day and sometimes multi-week journey through China would be towards the southernmost province of Yunnan, which shares a border with Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. This journey is known as the Underground Railroad. Along the way, defectors will stay in a clandestine network of safe houses, all the while led by guides who help them circumnavigate armed patrols and dangerous jungle terrain. Refugees typically have to hike across mountain ranges into Laos or Myanmar, and from there are transported to Thailand. This perilous journey is nearly over at this point. Here, South Korean diplomats or human rights workers fly them back to Seoul, a city that is often only a few dozen miles from the defectors' original place of departure. The fact that this terrifying route is the most likely method of escape really shows you why the Hermit Kingdom is something most people never even dream of escaping. Most human beings just aren't capable of surviving this kind of stress and torment, and those who can withstand such an ordeal must also contend with the fact that good fortune and luck are necessary requirements for a successful escape. Finally, we should take a look at the most daring of all escape routes, heading south across the DMZ. Now, this route is essentially a death wish, but there have been a handful of defectors to succeed in crossing the DMZ. Oh Chung-song, a North Korean soldier, was shot 5 times in the process, but still made it to South Korea. Some of you may remember this when it happened. It was probably the most dramatic escape from North Korea ever caught on film. In this scenario, if you were a soldier stationed at the DMZ, even though it's crazy, it might be the only option for defecting without outside help. Oh Chong-song made the decision to escape spontaneously, while in a military vehicle near the North Korean checkpoint. He just drove through it, with there being no barriers somehow, straight for South Korea. Driving his Jeep at top speed, he crashed and fell into a ditch, with a vehicle reportedly coming off. As his fellow North Korean colleagues closed in on him, he had no choice but to exit the Jeep and make a run for the borders, only yards away. He ducked behind a tree to avoid fire from the soldiers taking aim. The bullets ripped through him, with 5 shots hitting him directly. Fueled by adrenaline, he ran again before collapsing and crawling towards the border wall. After losing consciousness and riddled with bullets, South Korean soldiers managed to withstand the gunfire and drag his body to safety. Following a high-risk surgery, Oh was restored to health and granted asylum. He was free, but he had paid a price for that freedom, and so did everyone else. Because in response to this successful defection, North Korea installed a new gate along the road to the demilitarized zone, and 2 other gates that in the past were typically left open are now almost permanently closed, with one newly fitted with wheel spikes that are controlled manually, so you have to stand on them to deactivate them. So now it's even harder to escape, and the one-time route that was nothing short of a miracle is now truly impossible. The direct escape to South Korea, while being the most desirable for many North Koreans, remains the most life-threatening, and nothing will change that fact for a long time. These examples of refugee success stories are unfortunately the rare cases, plucked from an ever-growing collection of failed escape attempts, where a necessary stroke of luck was nowhere to be found. In the Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping era, North Korea has become so difficult to escape that it makes the escape routes of past decades look easy. One has to wonder, in a modern landscape of AI facial recognition, ever more advanced techno-surveillance tools, and a multipolar geopolitical landscape, if totalitarian regimes like North Korea will be escapable at all. Will the possibilities of reaching freedom ever return? Or will the technologies of the future continue to remove hope, making North Korea truly impossible to escape, once and for all? Thank you for watching.